Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. My name is Tara Woodley, and I am the president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, an organization that gives survivors and their families that have lost a loved one to domestic violence access to a community that understands the journey that they're facing. We hope this episode impacts you, whether you're a survivor or a family member, and that you want to learn more about the topic, and that the topics are helping you in some way. If it is, let us know by leaving a review. We love your feedback. Also, make sure to click the subscribe button and you will get notified of our next episode when it premieres. We hope you enjoyed our podcast. Thank you. Hi, I'm Tara Woodley, president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, and I'm happy to welcome you to our podcast, Through the Eyes of Survivors. And we're working hard to shatter myths and misconceptions of domestic violence and intimate partner abuse. My guest today, as we start this journey, will be Megan Lee, our vice chairwoman of the board of directors, Gabby Turner, our BTSADV community organizer, Odalis Robles, BTSADV resource coordinator. And thank you, ladies, for being here today. So our topic is going to be strangulation as it correlates to domestic violence. And we'll just start out with a little bit of statistics here for the public. According to the Journal of Emergency Medicine, 97% of victims are strangled and 38% report losing consciousness. 35% are strangled alongside with sexual assault. 70% believe they were going to die. And you're 80% more likely to die at the hands of your partner if strangulation is involved in your abuse. 50% of victims have visible injuries, but only 15% of that could be photographed. So our guests are here to give their unique experiences through the eyes of survivors. So, ladies, during your personal journey, having hands around your neck, I mean, that's the ultimate sign of power and control, the power to kill you. So we're going to talk a little bit about, power and control and how that relates within your relationships that you experienced and how that may have led to your strangulation. Megan, would you like to talk about that first, about your personal journey?
Sure. Mine did involve strangulation. We were having a verbal argument, and that escalated. I was driving a vehicle at the time, and he veered us off the road. Once I stopped the vehicle I was driving, he started choking me. And of course, I panicked, didn't really know what to do, but it was the screams of my 3.5-year-old child in the back seat that got him to stop choking me. But in the moment, I was trying to figure out how am I going to get his hands. He was a lot bigger than me. We were both Army soldiers, but my training didn't quite prepare me to have my spouse choking me while I'm driving a vehicle. So yeah, I was quite terrified and until it stopped. Didn't know how I was going to get out of the situation, because I was pinned against the car seat. And so yeah, it was quite terrifying. I would say it was even more terrifying for my child to be witnessing this in that moment. So that's really kind of what stuck with me, was in my mind, I'm thinking, you are scarring our child as you're doing this to me, and the damage is being done to me. You're scarring our child. and we're going to have years of therapy to follow this. Thankfully, he stopped. Then he attacked me from another angle, but we're kind of focusing on the strangulation for this one. So I would say it was terrifying when I met with a domestic violence counselor afterwards, and they told me that I'm now 7 times more likely to die at his hands as a result of him choking me. That was a real eye-opener and startling thing for me. You know, I'm like, oh my God, I knew he was psycho, you know, but I hadn't really considered the thought that he might actually kill me. And so that was actually when I left the relationship, was right after that happened. We had the police come by, they took pictures. There wasn't anything there that was visible to the naked eye. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, it was a terrifying experience.
And do you think that's just, you know, how would I put that? Do you believe that power and control, power play within the relationship was a contributing factor to this?
Absolutely. Right before he had started to choke me, he knew he lost all power because he said something very degrading to me, and my 3-year-old in the back seat turned it around and said, "No, Daddy, you're the," and what he had called me. And so that was like the trigger where he okay, I've lost control of this whole situation, and even my child is no longer on my side. And it was like the flip of a switch where I could literally see, and I was like, oh, like I had not seen that look in his eye before. So yeah, it was definitely an issue of power and control.
Wow, amazing that you lived through that. Gabby, would you tell us a little bit about your story and how that relates to power and control within the relationship you experienced?
Well, I was with my ex-husband from a very, very young age, and choking was kind of the way he handled things. When he got real aggravated with me, he would come up and just grab me by my neck. And it was always something very quick. And I actually justified it as he wasn't really hurting me. One of the very last times I had come home from work and we were arguing, the kids were in school, and we were in the kitchen, and he had me up against the counter and hands around my neck, knife to my throat. And I thought he was going to kill me. It was a real eye opener. But he used that in such ways that to know that he was always the boss. It even went into the bedroom, that he would like to choke me in the bedroom. And it became so normal for me that I normalized it. You know, he hadn't really ever hurt me, you know, maybe a little bruises around the neck. It wasn't until I left and got involved in this type of advocacy and work that I learned what at risk I really, really was. I hadn't even realized it.
Wow. Yeah, and did your children happen to witness any of this as well?
That particular instance, they did not, thank goodness. I'm sure they've witnessed it a lot, you know, as I can remember, the abuse was pretty frequent. So I'm pretty sure that they have, and it affects them. It affects them now. They don't, especially my youngest, she gets very on edge about anything that has to do with any type of violence. Like, she doesn't even like to hear yelling. It really affects how they handle conflict now. Like, my oldest will just lash out like crazy. And then my youngest, she cries and goes into a shell and doesn't want anything to do with it. So it's two very opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right. They deal with it in different ways, like all of us do. Yes. Oh, Dallas, tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, the guy that, well, the guy that strangled me, and I'm looking for words to how to, place it, but, it was, I'll say that I didn't make excuses for him. I saw the red flags and I chose to ignore them. Because I can clearly remember now that, the police officers asked me, had he strangled you before? And right away, my defense mechanism went up and I said, no. And then through therapy, through EMDR, through, just going through working on myself and advocating, becoming a resource coordinator, I started to, even CBT, I started to process, and I started to realize that it wasn't the first time that he choked me, because there's a real difference between choking and strangulation, right? They start off with the choking, they start off with the scare tactics and putting their hands on your neck and not, really strangling you, but just like seeing how far they can get, right? And that's what my abuser was doing to me, right? Like one day we were in a hotel and he would like to watch football games and basketball games and drink, right? Red flag number one, I should have known better. But I would justify it because he loved me and I just wanted to be loved, right? And so I was talking about the LGBTQ community and he didn't like that. And he just out of rage jumped off the chair and jumped onto the bed and just like put his hands on my throat, and then came back off the bed like nothing happened. But the day that he strangled me, I'll say that I was truly blessed that my son was not there. My son was at a hospital appointment, and I was actually studying for finals, and when he strangled me, it was a situation where what Gabby said, he lost control, or what Megan said, I think it was Megan that said it, he lost control because I no longer wanted to be with him. He couldn't keep his story straight. I met him in a moment where, because he had a DWI, because he got arrested on his birthday for drinking and driving, he couldn't be intoxicated. He couldn't drink and drive, and he was getting drug tested. And so I met him when he was not drinking and driving or smoking or hanging out with, bad people. So not to excuse him, but he was more around his family, more around me, more around my family, right? And when he got off that probation or whatever you want to call it, it was a whole different person. And when I didn't accept it, because, I'm pre-nursing school, I'm ready to go into nursing school. I didn't want to deal with someone who was drinking and smoking. And then I would look at your social media and you had all these women just like talking to you a certain way. And I was not okay with that. And so when I would talk to you about it, you would reverse the roles to me like, okay, you're tripping. That's their favorite word. You're tripping. It's your fault. You're tripping. You're seeing too much into it. And that specific day, I said, I don't want to be with you anymore. He goes, we're not together. I said, that's not what you told me 2 days ago. And he goes, show me how we're together. And I was like, open your text messages and look what you wrote to me 2 days ago. And when he opened up his text messages, the first thing that pops up is a girl half naked on his phone that he was talking to named Sunshine. And my initial reaction was to grab his phone and throw it. And I said, get out of my house. And I said, you're right, we're not together. I want nothing to do with you. And I said, and I'll tell your little girl, Sunshine or whatever, that she could have you. And that was I feel like my mistake, saying, I'll tell that girl that she can have you, because I should have just said, get out of my house, leave. You know what I'm saying? And when I said she can have you, he got up and he proceeded to fight me fight me like a man in my house. It got to the point where he was like, he had me in a chokehold. He broke my door. I think he was under the influence too. After that, we go downstairs and, well, not even, he goes downstairs and calls me and apologizes to me. And I'm in such shock, because that's the right word. I was in shock. Like, a person that I was in love with could hurt me so bad. I just wanted to know why. I was sitting in the car Indian style saying, why would you do this to me? Why? Like, I think that's what a lot of victims want to know. Why do you want to hurt? Why did you hurt me? Like, because a lot of victims or survivors don't ever get the why to it. And so I'm sitting in the car saying, why? And he just like, I said, you know what? I don't even care why. I'll find out why from her. And I turn around. And when I turn around, I get punched in the face. And he starts to strangle me to the point where I pass out. I literally pass out. And that is the moment where I feared for my life. I mean,
Right.
it was excruciating pain, but I feared for my life. And I'm screaming, help me. And I'm trying to get out the car. And in my mind, I can remember myself thinking, I'm never going to see my son again. I'm never going to see my son again. My son, I think, was like 4 at the time. And I don't know what it was that came into my body, but I proceeded to, with my right foot, kick the passenger door car because he proceeded to drive off with me. And I kicked the door so that so he couldn't close the door. And you can clearly see it in the video where he tries to lift my foot because I'm going in and out of consciousness, of consciousness. My niece was upstairs in my house. She runs downstairs and was able to yell out my name. And her yelling out my name is what saved my life, because when she yelled out my name, he stopped enough to where I mustered up whatever strength God gave me to run out. And when I ran out, I never looked back. And of course, she called the cops. My mom got there. She lived 5 minutes away. She was still alive at the time. And the cops are asking me, like, do I want to press charges? And at that moment, because I still loved the man who just tried to kill me, I didn't know if I wanted to press charges. I didn't know if I wanted to press charges. And the cop gets on his knees and says, you could have died today, because there's a 7.5% chance if you go back to him, he will kill you.
Right.
And then they ran his name and said, this is the guy you're dating. And he had a rap sheet that was 2 pages long. That I
Very eye-opening. Yeah.
I had no idea of. And they said, oh, let me throw something else in there. He's part of a gang. So he was taking you to kill you. And the tears came down because I could have lost my child. He would have never seen his mom again. And they took me to the hospital. The pain was so bad. They gave me pain medication. They put me through an MRI. I had a neck brace. They had to C-spine me. It was horrible. And so I started having nightmares. I had to move within a week. I wouldn't drive my car. My brother-in-law helped me. My brother-in-law helped me get a new car and signed under his name because I was so scared to drive my car because I was scared that he would kill me. I was scared that I was going to die. I was ordering groceries to my house. I wouldn't leave my bed. Remember I was telling y'all in last podcast, my best friend would tell me, oh, today we're showering and then we can go back into the bed.
Right.
I couldn't get out of bed, it was.
Yeah. Oh, Dallas. So like you're kind of touching on like that next talking point that we wanted to hit is that physical and emotional trauma that you suffer afterwards, right? So you're talking about that. You couldn't even get out of the shower and what that looks like. So like all of us, let's discuss that some, because like you being in the healthcare industry, you can attest to the fact that the type of injuries from this kind of trauma, there's brain injuries that they talk about that are veterans and football players, people in car accidents have that same kind of brain injury, the trauma that associates with it. So would you talk a little bit about that as well, since you are in the healthcare industry?
The first thing I did was I texted my manager because she's a registered nurse, and I told her what happened, and we had a meeting with security and everything. And I told her my injury. She took me off work for a little bit because she needed me to rest. And I started seeing my psychiatrist more regularly and my counselor, because I was already seeing them for stress because I have an autistic child. And so they diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder because when you go through such a traumatic event like strangulation, and what a lot of people don't realize who go through intimate partner violence is that when you go through your choking episodes where they choke you and then they sleep with you after an argument, that is considered sexual abuse at that moment, because you went through a choking incident and argument, and then he's like, now have sex with me during an argument, but he forced himself on you. And that's all trauma, you know, that registers in your frontal cortex. And I was literally having these nightmares where he would come into my house and kill me with a gun and kill my son and kill my family, kill my dog. It was horrendous. I would wake up screaming. I was shaking. And I was having therapy once a week. My doctor had to put me on, like, it's called Prazosin. It's called mini Prez, and they use it for military veterans for nightmares after war, because the military prepares you for war. They prepare you for a structured environment, but they don't prepare you for an unstructured environment after you discharge honorably. And so that's the kind of effect that you go through when you go through such a traumatic event like strangulation. And so I had to really, you know, find out how my PTSD was affecting me, because how it was affecting me was I was getting overstimulated. And when I was overstimulating, it would cause me to just have severe anxiety and palpitations and shake, and just, I can't even explain the fear.
Right. And Megan, I know you, you know, work in the military and been in the military and stuff. So maybe you can touch on some of that too, about how the injuries that are associated and the emotional trauma that goes along with it.
Well, for me, it took me a long time before I realized that I was suffering from PTSD. There's back when I was in, and it still is today, it's gotten a little bit better, but there is such a stigma about seeking mental health services that that I just kind of soldiered through it, and I carried on with my duties and my motherhood and all of that stuff. And it was actually my son that I sought services for first. He started showing signs of PTSD. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming that somebody was trying to kill his mommy. And so I ended up getting him in to see a counselor, and he was diagnosed with PTSD because of everything that he saw that night. Not just the strangulation, there was other stuff, and all in front of him. And his brother, thankfully, was still too young. He was 1.5, so he didn't really have memories of it. But my 3.5-year-old had vivid memories. I mean, he's 24 now, and to this day, he can describe to you what he saw. So I got him into counseling, you know, right away. And, you know, the counselor was saying it's hard when they're this young to really know, is this PTSD? Is it anxiety? Is it separation anxiety? What exactly is going on with him? But he definitely, with the recurring nightmares, he definitely has PTSD. So we started that, and then years after that, probably a good 5 years after that, 6 years after that, I finally, I had to go see, I was coming back from a deployment, and they said, okay, you got to go get your periodic health assessment done. And so I went in, and they started asking me about different things. And they said, have you ever seen somebody about the trauma that you experienced with your domestic abuse? And I said, no. And they said, do you want to? And I was like, you know what, maybe I should, because I keep picking the same winners time after time again. And so maybe I should go and start seeing a counselor. And I was diagnosed with PTSD for the things that he put me through. I would have nightmares that he was coming after me.
Mhm.
And those nightmares continued for quite a while. But when you look at how trauma affects the brain, in being strangled is definitely a traumatic situation where you don't know if you're going to live or die. But when trauma affects the brain's response, it goes back into the primitive response, where it is fragmenting your memories and storing it at different places that it doesn't normally store that memory. And it's doing that in an effort to protect yourself. So the amygdala is very active during that time. And that's our primitive brain that's taking over, and it's saying this, like, I have to protect the person from what's happening. So as those memories start to come back for a victim of trauma, oftentimes they come back fragmented and out of order. And it actually can look like, to a police investigator, it can look like the person's being deceptive or lying about what happened, right?
Right.
And so that's one of the things that's really, really important for us to be in our communities and be training our police officers in how trauma affects the brain, because strangulation is just one of many different traumas that a domestic violence victim may suffer, and understanding how that affects the brain, and how that, as those memories are coming back, how that actually looks in when you're seeing somebody get something out of order, or they said that this happened and then later they said, oh, that didn't actually happen, this happened instead, that's because that's how their brain is remembering this. And so yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the trauma that you see that a combat veteran goes through, or even those TBIs, those traumatic brain injuries that football players are experiencing on the football field. Those different injuries can very well mimic a trauma survivor, right? And
Right.
so they go through some of those same challenges and complications, and they may, a lot of them are dealing with PTSD, but they also may develop like a social anxiety. They may worry, become paranoid that their attacker, that their ex is out there, they're following them, or something happens in a situation that triggers them right back into that moment where they were being strangled.
Yes.
And it's hard to predict. It's actually unpredictable, right? You may know some of your triggers, but you may not know all of your triggers. And until you're in that moment and you're taken right back into that strangulation, you don't know how it's going to affect you. You don't know when it's going to affect you. This can last throughout our lifetimes, to where,
Right.
Maybe our current wonderful significant other does something that triggers us, even though we know we're safe with this current partner, right? We may
Mhm.
go right back into that fight, flight, or freeze moment of where we're trying to
Right.
survive that strangulation.
Exactly. And I think, like, this during this last year, the case of like Gabby Peto kind of like really projected this whole scenario of strangulation and domestic violence, because you could noticeably see in her interview with the cops, what she was experiencing it and how she was trying to make it just go under the radar and wash away. And then, she died at the hands of that partner later, being strangled. And so it's very, I think it's a good time for us, women to, speak up about this, because it really put it in the forefront. Gabby, what about you with any emotional trauma or physical trauma that you suffered?
Ooh, I suffered it all, that's for sure. So Megan, it's funny you were talking about, how is trauma stored in the brain, but what a lot of people don't also knowledge is how trauma is stored within the body. So I began
Yes.
I began
Yes.
having neck problems very young, to the point that they really couldn't explain the amount of neck problems that I was having. I had herniated discs. I had bone spurs. I had my neck surgery at 24 years old. To be that
Wow.
young with that type of, issues, I ended up with a C3, C4 fusion. My doctor was like, I can't explain it, but I would wake up in the middle of the night and my whole entire right side would be completely numb. And it got to the point that if I didn't have that surgery, I would have been paralyzed within 6 months. So I had that surgery, and I was still with my ex-husband during this time. I actually, the night I was in the hospital after my surgery, he went out with another woman, and I found out 2 days later after I gotten home. And so, of course, we had ended up getting into an argument. Now, mind you, I just had a tube down my throat. I got a scar right here. Like literally my entire neck had been cut open, and I had screws and a plate put into my neck. And we're arguing, and he takes his hand on my face and mushes my entire neck back. And I think I was about 72 hours post-op. So years later, after I'd finally left him, like finally left him, I no longer had any neck problems. But then the mental trauma kicked in, and I would experience the night terrors. And I call them terrors because it was beyond nightmares. I mean, it was waking up and screaming at the top of my lungs to the points that my kids would come in and make sure that I was okay. I don't think I got through a day without it. I would have sleep paralysis. I would wake up in the middle of the night and check all the windows and doors before I would go to sleep. I would put stuff in front of the doors so that if somebody came in, you could hear them. Like you were saying, they would think they would go to stalking. I was very paranoid. I was looking and double checking everything. I wouldn't even get in my car without the overhead light turning on so that I could look and make sure that he wasn't in my car. So the amount of the ways that your body and your brain stores trauma to protect you mentally as much as it can is really just it's crazy, because you never know where it's going to come from. But me being on my healing journey and working through some of my past traumas has healed not only my mind but my body. Even though I still do have night terrors from time to time. And I only know this because my dog will come from my daughter's room into my room and bark at the door because he wants to make sure I'm okay.
Yeah.
But I think this is some stuff that just never really goes away.
I want to just jump onto what Megan was saying with
Okay.
just on how trauma affects the brain, though, because, I want to talk about secondary PTSD because I found that out through my psychologist as well. While I was put on medicine to sleep because I was having, I'll agree with Gabby, terrors. Like I was waking up with night sweats and just screaming. It got to the point where my son was even scared at one point. And so I moved within a week, and I even got a garage. I paid the extra money for a garage because I wanted to park inside of a garage and park outside of a garage because even though I had a new car, I wanted that protection. My niece ended up becoming a victim of sexual assault. And with that being said, her trauma became my trauma, and I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that I was becoming irritable. I was raging. I was yelling at people that I wouldn't regularly yell at. I could not tolerate certain things that I usually could tolerate. I wasn't happy anymore, She had come to live with me, and after we found out and everything happened, my psychiatrist, she recommended me to see my psychiatrist again. And my psychiatrist told me, we're going to go up on your medicine because that's the reason you're having nightmares. Because even the faces changed in my nightmares. I was having dreams with them too. And she was like, because her trauma has now affected you, because you're so close to her that you're reliving her traumas as well. Like it's secondary PTSD. And it's not even something that I even noticed that could happen, So that's, something that is associated. Like as moms, we can suffer our children's traumas too. And so with that also being said, when you go through therapy, you realize that if you've been choked in the past or seen your parents being choked, like what Megan said, her 3-year-old had PTSD. I normalized it because I saw my mom being choked, right? I was choked as a teenager. So when my abuser did it in 2019, I normalized it. He loved me because it was what I grew up with. Right? So I didn't have that healthy boundary of a relationship and what it should be.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
The term for what you're describing, Dallas, that's a vicarious trauma. When we hear other people's traumas, even it doesn't even have to be family members. In my current job as a sexual assault response,
I'm gonna write that down.
We can fall victim to vicarious trauma, and that is listening to the traumatic things that are happening to other people. Can have that same effect on us. We can develop PTSD from that. We can develop anxiety, all of those things, because we're hearing and we're being exposed to that real life trauma. So yeah, vicarious trauma.
Right.
Wow, that's good information.
Down. Yeah, because I work in the ER, right? And I work in the ICU and I work pediatrics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've done, trauma, but for whatever reason, her specific trauma just,
it's family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
and as mothers, we tend to feel everything our children feel, especially we take it on ourselves. And so, yeah, it really is painful to see your child hurt like that and experience that kind of trauma along with it. And then Dallas, you experienced as well your mother's trauma and internalized it and made it normal. So we tend to just our brains function in very beautiful ways sometimes because it's trying to protect us in those moments. And at the same time, we got to find ways to heal from those moments as well. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the injuries, like whether or not whether they're seen. How can we help people realize? I know I had one of my family members, actually, he was in a domestic violence incident in which he was, slapped and choked. And when we were there and the cops were trying to take images, there was nothing there to show up. And because of that, back in the day, of course, they drop charges. They don't do anything. I know today, 48 states, strangulation is a felony. But it's just so hard to prove. So what are some of the ways that we can help not only our first responders deal with this, but also people out there, victims, realize that this is not to be downplayed. He didn't just choke you. It wasn't just, I think people tend to glorify it a little bit, or they sweep it under the rug. Either way, depending upon the person, how they're accepting it. But
we hope you're enjoying this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. We wanted to pause for a moment and let you know that Through the Eyes of Survivors has a shop now open. And this is a great way for you to not only help survivors of domestic violence, but also let everyone know that you will not be silent about this important cause. From t-shirts to bags to coffee mugs, we have so much to choose from. To grab your swag, head to our store at breakthesilencedv.org. That's store.breakthesilencedv.org. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate all that the community does to help support us and this organization. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode and continue to subscribe to future episodes. Thank you.
Like what do they need to know? Because if someone can't see the bruises, they tend to think, oh, it wasn't that bad, right? Yep. And so what would you say to them, Odalis, about that?
So I want to say that we always recommend, even if there's no bruises, that you go to the emergency room or go see a provider and get checked out. Because even if you
Right.
don't see bruises, that does not mean that you weren't choked enough to where there is damage done. I would also say that BTSADV is going to have it's called a strangulation log on our resource page, where it shows on there what to look out for 48 hours after you're strangled.
Right.
And in that journal, you look for red spots, you look for patache, that's what it's called. They're like little red bumps in your eyes, on the whites of your eyes, or on your neck, on your cheeks. You look for little lesions, sore throat, a cough can develop. You can lose your voice even. It can hurt to swallow. You can get neck pain, shoulder pain from it. It can hurt to move your neck side to side. And all these are symptoms of being strangled, because you can strangle someone, right? And if a person loses oxygen to their brain, you cannot redevelop brain cells. So if you come to the hospital because you need CPR, you need oxygen, we can do that for you. We cannot redevelop brain cells. Once your brain cells are dead, they're dead. And so when someone strangles you, you're losing brain cells and you can never get those back. So that is really important for everyone to know. That it is so important to know that if you stay and that person continues to strangle you, you continue to lose brain cells, and that affects your life long term.
Right. Absolutely. Megan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes. So in certain areas of the country, and not everywhere, they do have, some of our detectives do have special lighting that they can use as they photograph strangulation injuries now.
Right.
It's worth looking into if you are a victim of strangulation, where there is somewhere closest to you, and going there and having that photography used, because it can show under the skin and it can show that some of the damage under the skin. It may never even surface as a bruise, but it's there. Another thing to keep in mind is that we need to do a better job. Our police officers need to do a better job on the scene of asking questions, not just were you strangled, were you choked, did you lose consciousness, was there ever a moment where you had difficulty breathing, right? People can answer that question sometimes easier than I was strangled, right? Because yes, I did have difficulty breathing. Well, what was happening? Well, he or she was sitting on my chest. That is strangulation. It's not hands around the neck, but it's still strangulation. So, so there are certain things that we should be asking on the scene of responding to a domestic violence situation, that can provoke those yes answers, and actually, and then medical will know, okay, they've had their airway was constricted in some way, either by suffocation or the squeezing, sometimes just squeezing you so tight that you can't breathe, right? That's a strangulation, but it's not common knowledge that those are forms of strangulation. Also, I would say there is a lot of this younger generation, talking about my adult boys' age, and even teenagers in high school, who think that being choked during sex is something that's cool and that we should be doing it. And in reality, you shouldn't be doing it, because the person choking you is most likely not a medical expert, and they don't know if they're doing any damage to you, and you don't know if they're doing any damage to you. So
absolutely,
having some healthy discussion about sex and what is healthy in a sexual relationship is something that we can start doing in our high schools with kids who are coming of sexual age. And now I know there's like debates about talking about sex in high school and whatnot, but definitely on our college campuses as well.
Yes.
But educating our youth, a lot of our youth are getting their sex education through pornography.
Exactly.
There is strangulation. There is so much wrong going on in what they can access via the internet, right? These days,
Right.
porn is at your fingertips. So, and strangulation is a big piece of that, but really kind of making sure that our law enforcement who are on the scenes are asking some of those questions, not just are you strangled or were you choked, but some of those deeper questions. Have you ever lost consciousness? Was there ever a moment where you felt like you couldn't breathe? Those are really critical in helping survivors to be able to come to terms with what's happened.
And not doing it in
Right.
front of the abuser, not doing it in front of the abuser, pulling that survivor, that victim to the side. You know, that's so important.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Mhm.
they should never be interviewing a victim in front of their abuser. Yes, well, and there's a lot of states that do have laws too, where the state they are the ones who are pressing charges in this domestic violence situation, because just like you talked about, Odalis, where you still loved him and you didn't know, if you wanted to see him go to prison or jail or whatever. That's how a lot of domestic violence victims feel in that moment. This is somebody that I love, and I hate that they treated me like this, but I love this person, and I don't want to be in a situation where I have to defend them, for what they did to me, because I hate what they did to me. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Verify. I did press charges because I love myself and I love my son. And so
Absolutely.
when that officer told me you were going to die, that was enough for me to say I am going to press charges.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
a lot of states and jurisdictions now have better domestic violence laws where it's the state pressing the charges. It's because they know 9 times out of 10 those victims are going to back out and they don't want to press charges anymore, because of what we just talked about. But some of those better laws are there and in place to say it doesn't matter what this individual did to you is not okay, and the state's going to press charges against them.
Right. So let's walk back this a little bit, Gabby, for you. We were talking about that with strangulation and sex and how that is glorified. And I heard you back earlier talking about your story that you actually experienced some of that. So what would you tell like young people about that?
A lot of what Megan was saying too, and you had also mentioned this, is that stop normalizing it, or justifying it. So one of my biggest things until, all the times he held knives to me, all the times that he choked me, that he strangled me, that, I pulling at his hands, get off me. I always justified it with he didn't really hurt me. And that was because, like you guys were saying, you don't see the marks, you don't see the bruises. The only thing I would see would be maybe like a little scratch. Like, it didn't look like what it really was. So what I have learned about the sex part in choking, where women of abuse, especially who are in an abusive relationship, and allow their spouse to choke them during sex, it becomes a safe area for the pain. Me particularly, I knew I was going to endure this pain at some point, throughout the relationship, but in the bedroom, I could control it. So it became a controlled pain, a way to express my trauma. And now today, I don't know. Do not put your hands around my throat. That's not cool. That doesn't turn me on. It terrifies me. So don't normalize it. It's not okay. And he isn't just choking you. He is abusing you. Normal men don't do this to women that they love.
Right. It's not it's not something sexual or out of love. It is definitely about terror and control. Definitely.
You've seen the
So
movies, sorry to interrupt, but 50 Shades
yes,
of Grey, for example.
absolutely.
Famous movie cover is him with his hand around her throat and kissing her. So it's making this type of behavior become sexualized and accepted, and just normalize that. Oh, if a man pushes you against the wall and puts his hand around his throat, that's passion. And in a dynamic that's never experienced abuse, then that may be true. But for a survivor, especially, I'm going to tell you right now, if you come up to me, you put your hand around my throat and back me against the wall, you better be ready for a fight.
Absolutely. So, so Odalis spoke towards the very beginning. Why strangle me? Why did you do this? Why strangulation? Now, I read this article recently that talked about researchers saying that the seeds of this kind of, rage that they describe is planted in childhood with these batterers, and that the physical or sexual abuse began as part of their childhood and normalization. How do you ladies feel about that type of research? Do you believe that to be true within your experience, or not so true with what you experienced? Gabby, you go ahead first.
I am going to say 1000% yes. My ex-husband's family was extreme. His grandfather who raised him was extremely abusive to his grandmother, to his mother, to him. My ex-husband would tell me stories about, his grandfather would hold guns to him. That's why he was not scared of guns, because that happened to him his whole life. He'd been choked, he'd been thrown across walls. So it very much does come down the pipeline, for lack of a better word, and it is generational. So when they witness this, they feel like that's their way to express their rage. And I see it now in my own family and in my own children, that they have that same type of response. And one, like I said, they're opposite ends of the spectrum. The oldest is the rage, and that's how she feels that she expresses her hurt and her sadness or her fear or stress, or heck, it's a Tuesday. So but my youngest is going to cry, and she's going to go back into herself. So I really think it just depends how, like you were saying, Megan, where that trauma is stored in the brain and how the brain processes and expresses that trauma.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So, Odalis, what about you? How do you feel about the research? Do you
I
think that's
100% absolutely agree with Gabby. I feel that, and this is not giving them an excuse, because I said, I have one of my 12-year-old, my 12-year-old boy is a victim of sexual abuse, and he is currently, I have him in all kind of extracurricular activities, therapy, and I say all the time, you have a choice to walk away, and parenting parenting is involved as well, but I will say that when you grow up seeing the trauma, when you grow up seeing it in your family, when you grow up normalizing it, it is easier for you to act on it as an adult, because that is your normal. That is how your brain processes and shelves it. And so you grow up, I had my niece one time tell me she was a 0.75 adult, because she, in her mind, believed that she was an adult because she had to take care of her siblings at one point. And so at one point I was like, where's my 0.75 rent? And she said, I don't have it, but I'm still 0.75 adult. And I had to process it, that I had to meet her at her level, because she truly thought, because she never got the opportunity to not see it as a child should see it, that she truly believed that. And so I had to nurture her a different way. I had to talk to her a different way. I had to see her a different way. And so, yes, these perpetrators have either seen violence, been through violence, committed violence before. And, because we as victims have been through violence as well, or have seen violence, some of us, or the majority of us, we ignore the red flags. Because I love the internet, right? I could have just as easily went online and Googled all of his information and looked at his rap sheet. I chose not to. I chose not to look up. That's public information, you know? And so, yes, I 100% agree with Gabby.
Yeah. Megan, how do you feel about the research? And also, like, what would you recommend could be healthy things for like children to help express that rage, maybe we as mothers can help our children so that we stop the next generation of this type of abuse.
Absolutely. So for first of all, there is truth in this, saying that psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. So there is a small percentage of the population who will do stuff like this for whatever psychopathic reasoning their brain is clicking in, right? But the vast majority of people are learning this behavior, and typically learning it in childhood. When you look at the ACEs studies, the adverse childhood experiences studies, there are several different traumatic things that a child can experience in childhood, from as bad as watching domestic violence or being physically abused themselves, to as benign as having divorced parents, right? And the more of these ACEs that a child gets through childhood, the more likely they are to be victims of abuse and to become abusers themselves. So I say that because there is research behind it, and there is evidence that children seeing these things and experiencing these things in childhood doesn't do them any favors as they grow up in life.
Right.
So, but with that being said, it is an adult's choice as to whether or not they act out those things that they know were not okay when they were growing up, or if they say, I will never be like that. So typically children seeing this are act of one of two ways. I will never do what I saw happen to my mom or to my dad, or that's exactly how I'm going to treat my significant other, right?
Right.
So so I will say the best thing that we can do as parents to our children is to get out of these toxic relationships as soon as we can. My ex-husband, he did that stuff to me. I left that day. That night I had him arrested, and I said, I will never, because if I allow my boys to be raised in this household where he is treating their mother this way, they're going to grow up thinking this is how I'm supposed to treat women. You know, I got a 50-50 chance. They're either going to hate it, say I'm never going to do that, or they're going to think this is how we do things. So my children learned one very important lesson that night. If you treat your wife that way, you lose your family. You lose your family, right? Because in the state of Colorado, there was a criminal restraining order that was slapped on him immediately. And guess what? He criminally abused all of us that night because he grabbed the steering wheel and headed us for a guardrail. So reckless endangerment for all of us, right? And then the physical stuff for me. So there was an immediate criminal restraining order against the 3 victims, right, of his crazy behavior that night. But the best thing that we can do as parents is to get our children out of that situation as soon as we can, and to recognize and understand that this is going to have an effect on your children. If they saw this happening to you, we can't stop. We can't protect them from all of that. But what we can do after the fact is to get them the help that they are going to need. They're going to need help to get past and to work through what they saw. There's great childhood therapists that are available. A lot of them use play therapy to help them work through some of those feelings that they're having about it. But also talk to your children about this, right? Don't make it that taboo thing like, oh, we're not going to talk about what you saw daddy do to mommy. No, talk about that, and talk about how that hurt you. Talk about how that, you know, mommy is scared. Mommy is scared. She's going to protect you, you know, but mommy is scared. was very scared when daddy was doing this, or mommy was doing this to mommy, or whatever the scenario is. But we need to talk to our children about that. Acknowledge their pain, acknowledge their feelings, validate their feelings. I know you're scared. It's okay to be scared. That was really scary for mommy too. So, but definitely.
Well, and it's okay for them to be angry as well over the
Absolutely.
situation. Sometimes we don't allow our children permission to have anger.
Yeah.
And I think that's a detriment to, help them learn how to respect that emotion, but deal with it in an appropriate manner, right?
Right. And it's a hard balance, right? To then of that obviously if that person is a biological parent, they're going to be in your child's life, right? There's not a lot of you to divert that as much as we may want to. But allowing them to have that anger, but then also, but we are still going to respect daddy as your father, right? Because we don't want them to learn that if they get upset with an adult, that they can disrespect an adult, right? Because we've got to teach them to respect adults and figures of authority. That's part of our jobs as parents. So finding that balance, right? And it's okay for us to be mad and angry at whatever happened, because stuff is still going to happen if they're in their lives, right? Disappointments, letdowns, promises broken, hearts shattered. That stuff is going to happen because these people are abusers by nature, and it doesn't just happen with us. They will continue to have relationships where they're abusive, and they may even direct some of that towards our children. And it is also our job as parents that if we suspect that our ex is being abusive with our children, that we protect them. So if that means calling social services on your ex, so be it. But it's our job to protect our children to the best of our ability. Go back to court and ask to have that visitation schedule modified. There are things that we can do as parents to try and protect our children. So
absolutely.
I just want to jump on to what Megan said.
Yes.
Some of the things I do at home for my kiddos, and I learned this through therapy I go to therapy and all my children go to therapy. I have a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And so what I do is I take one day a week and we have a mental health discussion, a 30-minute discussion. I look up a quote and I have them each decipher what that means to them. And we just have an open communication about it, right? I also bought each one of them a CBT toolbox book where they can discuss their triggers. They can put in there what bothers them, what their favorite, their likes, their dislikes, because then I can learn them, I can learn their likes, their dislikes. Just like Megan said, I let the angriest one for me was that 12-year-old, the male. And so what I let him do was I let him express that anger out. I let him, and I had a discussion with his parents and I said, y'all just have to listen to him. If he doesn't get this anger out and y'all just let him just say it, it's gonna hurt, but y'all have to let him say these things. In the long run, he's gonna end up saying it to the wrong person, or he'll end up dead or in jail. And so y'all have to choose y'all poison. And so he let it all out. And now he is the most charismatic, sweetest child ever. And he loves cuddles and he loves hugs. And so I make sure to hug them. I make sure to tell them they're important. I make sure to tell them I love them. I make sure to, not argue with them, give them like a lot of rewards. Like there's a big reward system in my house, and we don't punish, we discipline, and so I kind of do that factor with them. And I give them an opportunity to mess up so that they can know that they're normal, they're normal kids, they're not broken. And so that's the kind of the things that I do with them so that they can trust me.
Absolutely. And Gabby, did you want to add anything as we're concluding?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Odalis or Megan, anything else that you'd like to add as we conclude?
I would say that, we'll be having a lot of resources for strangulation on our resource page. You know, to utilize our support line for BTSADV, you know, if you want someone to talk to, as we are survivors, and we'll be able to guide you in the right direction. You know, I feel that majority of the states have that if you feel those red flags are there, you know, first name, last name, date of birth, you know, look and see if there's a criminal record for domestic violence, you know. I feel that if I would have done that, I could have maybe prevented, you know, but I don't want to live in the past, because I want to also share as an inspiration that, you know, your life doesn't end after strangulation. You know, like Megan said, Megan, you know, still works, and she's career driven. She's remarried. She has children. She's very focused. You know, Gabby is a director. You know, Tara is a board president. I am finishing nursing school. We all decided to become survivors who became warriors, who are becoming thrivers. And you get to choose to become a survivor, thriver, warrior, because at the end of the day, you matter.
Absolutely.
So one last thing I'll say about this topic is that our children learn how their romantic relationships should be based off of what they're observing from us. So
Yes.
if we find healthy relationships to get into, where we have mutual love and respect with our partners, then that's what they're going to seek, right? That's what they're going to seek in their adulthood, in their relationships. So I can't stress again how important it is to not stay in those relationships that are toxic when you have children. I know it's not easy to leave. I think all of us can attest to that. But there are resources out there. Find out, look in your community, contact your local batter shelter, and see what they have. What can they help you with? There is victim compensation laws in most states where they could assist you to move into a new place, find good employment, because a lot of our survivors were financially abused as well, and they're tied financially to that person, and that's why they're not leaving. So I just say the information is out there. If you have access to the internet, please start researching these things. You can do it. Most of these websites have a quick to exit, and it's already cleared from your browser history. So if your abuser is, you know, suspecting that you may be getting close to leaving, there's so many things that can be done.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, ladies. This concludes our podcast, Through the Eyes of Survivors. Please be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast so that you'll get notified on our upcoming episodes. And if this episode has been informative, please feel free to go to our webpage, breakthesilenceagainstdomesticviolencedv.org, and help a survivor out with a donation for our great programs. You can help us break our silence. Together we can be, you know, the next person who can help a family out of an abusive relationship. And if you or a loved one are a victim of domestic violence, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 for confidential assistance from trained advocates. But for more resources, or if you need someone to talk to or listening ear, call our BTSADV support line at 1-855-287-1777, or see our webpage at breakthesilencedv.org. Thank you so much.